Every morning at 5:30 a.m., Kyla Martinez pushed her cart through the sterile corridors of Blackstone Research Facility in Denver, Colorado. The scientists barely noticed her, just another invisible face in a blue uniform, emptying trash cans and mopping floors. They had no idea that the woman scrubbing their lab benches had once been Staff Sergeant Kyla Martinez, U.S. Army Chemical Corps, with expertise in biochemical warfare that rivaled their own PhDs. But on March 15, 2024, that hidden knowledge would be the only thing standing between Denver and a catastrophe that could kill millions. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like any other. Kyla's alarm buzzed at 4:45 a.m. in her cramped studio apartment on the east side of Denver. She rolled out of bed, her left shoulder aching, a reminder of the IED that had ended her military career 3 years ago. The VA disability checks weren't enough to live on, and her applications to legitimate chemical companies kept getting rejected. Overqualified, they said, though she suspected it had more to do with the circumstances of her discharge. She pulled on her uniform, the same blue polyester she'd worn for 8 months now, and grabbed her thermos of black coffee. The bus ride to Blackstone took 45 minutes, winding through Denver's industrial district until it reached the imposing glass and steel complex that housed one of the nation's premier biodefense research facilities. Security waved her through without a second glance. Badge scan, metal detector, the usual routine. Marcus Webb, the night security guard, barely looked up from his crossword puzzle. "Morning, Kyla. Building 7 needs extra attention today. They had some kind of spill in Lab C yesterday." Kyla nodded, pushing her cart toward the service elevator. Building 7 housed the Level 3 biosafety labs, where researchers worked on classified government contracts. She'd been cleaning those labs for months, watching through safety glass as scientists in hazmat suits conducted experiments she could probably design better herself. The elevator hummed to the 4th floor. The corridors were empty except for the occasional researcher heading home after a night shift. Dr. Amanda Chen passed by, looking exhausted, clutching a tablet to her chest. She was one of the few scientists who actually acknowledged Kyla's existence with a tired smile. Lab C's door was sealed with yellow caution tape and a biohazard warning. Through the reinforced window, Kyla could see the aftermath of whatever had happened. Overturned equipment, broken glass, and what looked like a dark stain spreading across the floor. A handwritten note was taped to the door. "Contained spill, custodial cleared for decontamination." Kyla suited up in the antechamber, pulling on the disposable hazmat suit, gloves, and respirator. The familiar routine brought back memories of her military days, suiting up to investigate potential chemical threats in remote outposts, analyzing unknown substances that could wipe out entire villages. Inside the lab, the air filtration system hummed loudly. The spill was larger than it had appeared through the window, a viscous amber-colored liquid that had spread across nearly half the lab floor. Broken glass from several containment vessels sparkled under the fluorescent lights. As she began setting up the decontamination equipment, something caught her eye. The pattern of the spill wasn't random. It radiated outward from a specific point near the main workstation, but there were secondary splatter patterns that didn't match an accidental drop. This looked deliberate. Kyla knelt down, careful not to disturb the scene. Her training kicked in automatically. Threat assessment, contamination analysis, evidence preservation. She pulled out her phone and took several photos before she realized what she was doing. Old habits. The lab's computer terminal was still logged in, displaying a cascade of error messages. Most were routine system warnings, but one caught her attention. Containment protocol violated, sample BR47, unauthorized access. BR47. The designation triggered a memory from her military briefings. Biological agents were typically classified with letter-number combinations, and the 47 series had been reserved for experimental bioweapons during her time in service. She moved to the workstation where the spill originated. Among the broken glass was a partially intact label, Project Mindbridge, BR47X, authorized personnel only. The rest was illegible, destroyed by whatever had been spilled. Kyla's blood ran cold. MindBridge had been mentioned in classified briefings she'd attended during her final year of service. A theoretical bioweapon designed to target specific neurological pathways, not immediately lethal but capable of causing permanent cognitive damage on a massive scale. The kind of weapon that could cripple a city's population without destroying infrastructure. She was still processing this information when she heard voices in the corridor. Dr. Rebecca Hayes, the lab director, was talking to someone in urgent hushed tones. Confirmed breach at 0300 hours. We've contained the immediate area, but we need to know exactly what Thompson accessed before he... The voices faded as they moved past the lab. Thompson. Kyla remembered him, Dr. Marcus Thompson, a biochemist who'd been working late shifts for weeks. She'd noticed him because he was always agitated, making phone calls in languages she couldn't identify. Kyla quickly finished documenting the scene with her phone, then began the actual cleanup process. But her mind was racing. If MindBridge was real, if someone had stolen samples, Denver could be facing a biological attack unlike anything in modern history. As she worked, she noticed something else troubling. The ventilation system in Lab C had been modified. Additional ductwork that didn't appear on the building schematics she'd studied during her first week. The new ducts led toward the main air handling system for the entire facility. By 7 a.m., the lab was spotless, all traces of the spill neutralized with the appropriate chemical agents. But Kyla had kept one crucial piece of evidence, a small glass fragment with residue that she'd carefully sealed in a sample container from her cleaning supplies. She changed out of the hazmat suit and returned to her regular duties, but her thoughts kept returning to that error message and the modified ventilation system. During her break, she found herself in the facility's technical library, ostensibly restocking paper supplies, but actually accessing the building's architectural database. The modifications to Lab C's ventilation were recent, installed just 2 weeks ago under a work order signed by Dr. Thompson himself. The new ductwork connected not just to the building's air system, but to the emergency atmospheric processing unit that could rapidly circulate air throughout the entire complex in case of contamination. Kyla realized with growing horror that someone hadn't just stolen biological weapons material, they'd created a delivery system that could distribute it throughout one of Denver's most important research facilities. And if the timing was right, during the facility's monthly all-hands meeting, when nearly 300 people would be gathered in the main auditorium. She checked her phone. Today was March 15th. The quarterly safety briefing was scheduled for 2 p.m. Her hands shaking slightly, Kyla pulled out the glass fragment she'd saved. Under the library's magnifying lamp, she could make out more of the label. Aerosol, deployment tested, stable at room temperature. Whatever had been spilled in Lab C wasn't an accident. It was a test run. Kyla's military instincts screamed at her to report what she'd found immediately, but to whom? The facility's security was contracted through Homeland Security, and any official report would trigger protocols that could take hours to process. If her suspicions were correct, they had less than 7 hours before the quarterly meeting. She needed more information first. During her lunch break, Kyla made her way to the employee records office in the basement. Janet Morrison, the records clerk, was always grateful when Kyla helped organize the filing cabinets during slow periods. Today, that relationship paid off. "Hey Janet, I'm trying to track down Dr. Thompson from Building 7. Someone left their wallet in the lab I was cleaning, but I can't find him anywhere." Janet pulled up Thompson's file without hesitation. "Marcus Thompson? He called in sick today, first time in 2 years actually. Here's his emergency contact information." Kyla memorized the address, a downtown apartment complex about 20 minutes from the facility. But what caught her attention was Thompson's employment history. He'd been hired 8 months ago, right around the time the MindBridge project had received renewed funding according to the budget documents she'd glimpsed while emptying waste baskets in the administrative offices. More troubling was his previous employer, Meridian Biochemical Solutions, a private contractor that had lost its government clearance the previous year due to security irregularities. Several of its former employees had disappeared entirely from public records. After work, instead of taking her usual bus home, Kyla rode down Thompson's address. The Riverside Towers was a nondescript apartment building popular with young professionals. She positioned herself at a coffee shop across the street with a clear view of the entrance. At 6:30 p.m., a black sedan pulled up. Two men in business suits got out, clearly not residents. They entered the building and emerged 15 minutes later, carrying a laptop bag and several file boxes. One of them was speaking rapidly into a phone in what sounded like Russian. Kyla followed the sedan at a distance, using skills she'd learned during urban reconnaissance training in the Army. The car led her to an industrial warehouse on the outskirts of Denver, in a district filled with legitimate shipping companies and manufacturers. Perfect cover for something that shouldn't exist. She parked her beat-up Honda several blocks away and approached on foot as darkness fell. The warehouse bore the sign Rocky Mountain Import-Export, but the loading docks were sealed and no legitimate business seemed to be operating. Through a gap in the security fencing, Kyla could see the black sedan parked next to two other vehicles. Light emanated from windows on the second floor, and she could hear the hum of industrial equipment, specifically the kind of air filtration systems used in biochemical laboratories. Using her phone's camera with maximum zoom, she photographed the license plates and building details. Then she noticed something that made her blood freeze. An unmarked white van identical to the ones used by Blackstone's emergency response team was parked behind the warehouse. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop looking or join Thompson. Your choice. Someone was watching her. Kyla immediately left the area, taking a circuitous route back to her car while checking for surveillance. Her military training had taught her how to detect and evade pursuit, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being monitored. Back in her apartment, she spread out everything she knew on her kitchen table. The timeline was becoming clearer. Thompson had gained access to the Mindbridge bioweapon, tested its deployment system in Lab C, and was now working with foreign operatives to execute some kind of attack. The quarterly safety meeting was the perfect target. 300 people in an enclosed space with centralized ventilation. But there were still gaps in her understanding. How exactly did they plan to introduce the bioweapon into the air system? The modifications to Lab C's ventilation were sophisticated, but the main auditorium was in Building 2, connected to a different HVAC network. She pulled out the building schematics she'd accessed earlier and studied them more carefully. The emergency atmospheric processing unit she'd discovered wasn't just connected to Building 7. It was part of a facility-wide system designed to rapidly exchange air in case of contamination. During the monthly safety drill, this system would be activated as part of the demonstration. The safety meeting itself was the delivery mechanism. Kyla realized she needed help, but conventional channels were compromised. The people watching her clearly had access to official communications, possibly even inside the facility's security apparatus. She needed someone with authority who operated outside normal bureaucratic channels. She remembered Agent Sarah Collins from the FBI's WMD task force, who had been a guest lecturer during her final training course at Fort Leonard Wood. Collins had given her card to several students, encouraging them to reach out if they ever encountered anything suspicious in civilian life. Kyla found the card in her old Army footlocker, along with her service medals and commendations she never displayed. The card was 3 years old, but worth a try. The phone rang twice before a tired voice answered. Collins. Agent Collins, this is former Staff Sergeant Kyla Martinez, U.S. Army Chemical Corps. You probably don't remember me, but… Fort Leonard Wood, October 2021. You asked about detection protocols for aerosolized synthetic compounds. What's going on, Sergeant? Kyla quickly outlined everything she'd discovered, from the lab incident to her surveillance of the warehouse. Collins listened without interruption, asking only brief clarifying questions. How certain are you about the timeline? Collins asked when Kyla finished. The meeting is tomorrow at 2 p.m. Based on the evidence pattern and the system modifications, I'd say they're planning to activate during the emergency air exchange demonstration. I'm in Washington, but I can have a team in Denver within 4 hours. Can you get back into the facility tonight? I have access, but if they're monitoring me. They are. I'm running your name through our surveillance detection systems now. 3 different intelligence services have flagged you as a person of interest in the last 6 hours. Russian SVR, Chinese MSS, and a third party we haven't identified. Kyla felt her stomach drop. 3 intelligence services? This is bigger than just Thompson. MindBridge isn't just a stolen bioweapon. It's the centerpiece of a coordinated attack. We've been tracking chatter about something called Operation Neural Storm for months, but couldn't identify the target or method. Collins continued, I need you to get back into that lab and collect physical evidence of the bioweapon. Without samples, we can't prove anything or develop countermeasures. Can you do it? Kyla looked at her reflection in the dark window of her apartment. The scared cleaning lady was gone, replaced by the soldier she'd once been. I'll need 2 hours to plan the infiltration. And, Agent Collins, if something happens to me, the warehouse location and license plates are in an email I'm sending you now. Understood. Kyla, be careful. These people have already killed Thompson and at least 2 other researchers. They won't hesitate to eliminate you. After ending the call, Kyla opened her Army footlocker completely for the first time in 3 years. Beneath her dress uniform was a small kit she'd assembled during her final deployment. Lockpicks, electronic bypass tools, chemical detection strips, and a military-grade gas mask. She'd hoped never to use them again. At 11:47 p.m., Kyla crouched behind the landscaping outside Blackstone Research Facility's east entrance. The March air was cold enough that her breath formed small clouds, but she'd deliberately chosen this time when the overnight shift change would create a brief window of distraction. She'd spent 2 hours studying the facility's security patterns from her car, timing the guards' rounds and identifying the blind spots in camera coverage. The loading dock she'd selected was used only during day shift and had a maintenance access panel she'd noticed during her regular cleaning duties. Her phone vibrated with a text from Agent Collins. Team ETA 0300. FBI air support on standby. Stay low profile until we arrive. 3 hours was cutting it close, but Kyla couldn't wait any longer. If her analysis was correct, the operatives would need to install their delivery systems sometime between midnight and 6 a.m. to avoid the day shift workers. The maintenance panel yielded to her bypass tools within 90 seconds. Inside, the narrow service tunnel was just wide enough for her to crawl through, following the building's main electrical conduit toward Building 7. Her military-grade flashlight cast a thin beam ahead, revealing junction points and access hatches every 30 feet. She emerged through a utility closet on Building 7's second floor, exactly where the building schematics had indicated. The corridors were dimly lit by emergency lighting, and she could hear the hum of late-night equipment from the active labs. Lab C was still sealed, but Kyla wasn't heading there. Her target was the atmospheric processing control room on the 5th floor, where the facility's entire ventilation system could be monitored and controlled. If the operatives were installing their delivery mechanism, that's where they'd need access. The stairwell was empty, but as she reached the 4th floor landing, she heard voices echoing from above. 2 men speaking in hushed Russian. She pressed herself against the wall and listened. Installation complete in 30 minutes. The dispersal unit is calibrated for maximum coverage during the emergency cycle. What about the cleaning woman? Moscow wants her eliminated before the operation. After. She could still be useful if we need a scapegoat. The Americans love their lone gunman theories. Kyla's blood chilled. They were already here, and they'd planned for her discovery all along. She was walking into a trap, but she was also the only person who could stop them. She continued up to the 5th floor, moving with the silent precision her urban warfare training had drilled into her. The control room door was propped open, and she could see electronic equipment and cables scattered across the floor. Someone had torn apart the atmospheric processing control panel. Through the doorway, she observed two figures working on a device about the size of a briefcase, connected to the main ventilation controls through a maze of bypass cables. One was inputting commands on a laptop, while the other assembled what looked like a pressurized canister system. The dispersal unit. Kyla activated her phone's camera and began recording, capturing clear footage of the device and the men's faces. One she recognized from the warehouse surveillance, the man who'd been on the phone. The other was younger, probably in his 20s, with the precise movements of someone trained in demolitions or electronic warfare. She needed to get closer to document the device's specifications, but the control room had only one entrance. Instead, she retreated to the adjacent server room, where she knew the ventilation system's diagnostic computers were housed. The server room's terminal was still logged in to the atmospheric processing system. Kyla pulled up the current status display and immediately saw the problem. The system had been reprogrammed to activate a deep clean cycle during the safety meeting, a function that would rapidly exchange all air in the facility within 15 minutes, drawing from what the system believed was the emergency filtration unit. But according to the diagnostic readings, someone had rerouted the emergency intake to pull air directly from a new source, a source that wasn't on any official schematic. She photographed the control settings and system logs, then accessed the facility's architectural database to identify exactly where this rogue air intake had been installed. The location made her stomach drop, directly adjacent to the loading dock where she'd seen the stolen emergency response van. They weren't just planning to poison the safety meeting. They were going to contaminate the entire facility and blame it on a systems malfunction. Kyla quickly copied the system logs to her phone and began the process of reversing their modifications. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, drawing on her knowledge of atmospheric control systems from her military training. If she could isolate the tampered controls and restore the original settings. "I thought we might find you here." She spun around to find the younger operative pointing a silenced pistol at her chest. His English was perfect, with no trace of an accent. "Hands where I can see them. Step away from the terminal." Kyla raised her hands, but remained positioned between him and the computer. "You're making a mistake. The FBI knows about Neuralstorm. They're already on their way." He smiled. "Agent Collins? We've been monitoring her communications for hours. Very convenient of her to keep us informed of federal response plans." The revelation hit Kyla like a physical blow. Collins was compromised. The FBI team wouldn't be coming to help. They'd be walking into an ambush.
"You seem surprised," the operative continued. "Did you really think a facility like this operated without international oversight? Your government has been very cooperative in certain matters. This is an American research facility working on defensive countermeasures," Kyla said, stalling for time while her hand slowly moved toward the emergency shutdown switch behind her. "Defensive? Project Mindbridge was designed as a weapon from the beginning. Your Dr. Hayes has been selling research data to 3 different governments for 2 years. Tomorrow's demonstration will simply be the field test she's been promising." The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. The facility's director wasn't just compromised, she was running the entire operation. The theft from Lab C, Thompson's disappearance, even Kyla's discovery, all of it had been orchestrated to create plausible deniability for what was essentially a sanctioned attack on American citizens. "The samples will be traced back to Iranian bioweapons research," the operative continued. "Very convenient timing, given current tensions in the Middle East. Your country will have justification for whatever response it chooses." Kyla's hand found the emergency shutdown switch. "Except, I'm going to stop you." She slammed the switch down and simultaneously dove toward the server rack as the operative fired. The bullet shattered the monitor where her head had been a second earlier. Emergency lighting bathed the room in red as all atmospheric processing systems shut down facility-wide. The operative cursed in Russian and fired again, but Kyla was already moving, using the server racks as cover. Her military training kicked in completely now. Assess, adapt, attack. He had the advantage of firepower, but she knew this building better than anyone. She grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall mount and triggered it, filling the narrow space between the servers with thick chemical fog. The operative's next shots went wide as visibility dropped to 0. Kyla used the confusion to reach the room's secondary exit, leading to the emergency stairwell. But as she opened the door, she found herself face to face with the older operative from the control room. "Going somewhere?" he asked in accented English, raising his own weapon. Behind her, she could hear the younger man moving through the fog-filled server room. She was trapped between them with nowhere to run. But Kyla Martinez hadn't survived 3 deployments and an IED blast by giving up easily. She smiled grimly and pulled the pin from the military smoke grenade she'd brought from her old kit. "Yeah," she said, rolling the grenade between them. "I'm going to save 300 lives." The military smoke grenade detonated in a burst of dense white fog that instantly filled the stairwell. Kyla dropped flat and rolled through the doorway as gunshots echoed above her, the bullets striking concrete where she'd been standing moments before. She sprinted down the emergency stairs 3 at a time, her lungs burning from the chemical smoke she'd inadvertently inhaled. Behind her, she could hear the operatives shouting commands to each other in Russian, their voices growing more distant as she descended. On the 3rd floor, she exited the stairwell and ran toward the facility's main server room. If Hayes was orchestrating this operation, she'd need direct access to override the systems that Kyla had just shut down. The central hub in Building 2 was the only location with administrative privileges over all facility networks. The corridors were now bathed in red emergency lighting, and she could hear the facility's automated systems broadcasting warnings about atmospheric processing failures. Her emergency shutdown had bought time, but she knew Hayes would find a way to restore the system before the safety meeting. As she reached the connecting bridge between buildings, her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from a number she didn't recognize. "Collins compromised. Real FBI team inbound 0530. Suggest immediate evacuation. Jay." Who was Jay, and how did they know about her situation? She didn't have time to analyze it. Through the bridge's windows, she could see vehicles moving in the parking lot below. 3 black SUVs were positioning themselves around the facility's exits. Hayes was sealing off escape routes. The central server room in Building 2 required a higher security clearance than Kyla possessed, but she'd observed Dr. Hayes entering her access code dozens of times while cleaning the adjacent offices. Hayes was methodical about security, using the same 12-digit combination for multiple systems. The code worked. Inside the server room, banks of computer monitors displayed the facility's entire infrastructure in real time. The atmospheric processing system showed emergency shutdown across all displays, but Kyla could see someone was already attempting to restore functionality from a remote terminal. She had perhaps 10 minutes before Hayes regained control. Working quickly, she accessed the building's historical surveillance footage and began downloading files to multiple external drives she'd brought. If she couldn't prevent the attack, she needed evidence that would expose the conspiracy afterward. The footage from Lab C showed everything. Hayes personally supervising the installation of the modified ventilation system, Thompson's confrontation with Hayes when he discovered the true nature of their research, and his subsequent disappearance. But most damning was video from Hayes's own office, showing her in meetings with the same operatives Kyla had encountered upstairs. As the files downloaded, Kyla accessed the facility's employee database and began transferring personnel records to her phone. If this was truly a false flag operation, she needed proof of everyone involved. That's when she found Thompson's real file, not the sanitized version Janet had shown her, but his classified military record. Marcus Thompson hadn't been a biochemist at all.
He was Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Thompson, U.S. Army Intelligence, working undercover to investigate suspected security breaches at Blackstone. He'd been killed because he'd discovered the same conspiracy Kyla had stumbled into. Her phone buzzed again. "Exit now. Hayes returned to the facility with a tactical team. You have 5 minutes. Jay." Kyla grabbed the external drives and bolted from the server room. The mysterious Jay seemed to be watching the situation in real time, providing intelligence that had kept her alive so far. But who had that level of access to ongoing operations? She made it to the first floor as she heard vehicles pulling up to the main entrance. Through the lobby windows, she could see Dr. Hayes stepping out of a black SUV flanked by 6 men in tactical gear. They moved with the precision of military contractors, not facility security. The service tunnels were her only option now. Kyla reached the utility access she'd used earlier, but as she opened the maintenance panel, she heard footsteps in the corridor behind her. "Dr. Martinez." Hayes's voice was calm, almost conversational. "I know you're here. We need to talk." Kyla froze. How did Hayes know her military rank? "Your service record is quite impressive," Hayes continued, moving closer. 3 tours in Afghanistan, expert in biochemical threat assessment, honorably discharged after that unfortunate incident in Kandahar, though the official report left out some interesting details. The incident in Kandahar. Kyla's chest tightened as suppressed memories surfaced. The village where her unit had discovered an illegal weapons lab, the civilians who'd been used as test subjects, and her refusal to follow orders that would have covered up war crimes. Her discharge hadn't been medical, it had been political. "You reported your commanding officer for using civilian populations as test subjects for experimental weapons. Very principled of you, very naive." Kyla remained silent, calculating distances to potential cover. "Colonel Richards was working for me even then. The Kandahar lab was a prototype for what we're doing here. You cost us 3 years of research and nearly exposed the entire program." The revelation hit Kyla like a physical blow. Her own military unit had been part of this conspiracy from the beginning. The civilians she'd tried to save, the weapons she'd helped identify, it had all been part of Hayes's research into bioweapons deployment. "So you see, Dr. Martinez, this isn't really about stopping a terrorist attack. This is about finishing what we started in Afghanistan. You're going to help us perfect the delivery system, just like you were supposed to do 3 years ago." Hayes stepped into view, flanked by 2 tactical operatives. She was younger than Kyla had expected, probably in her early 40s, with the kind of composed confidence that came from years of manipulating complex operations. The beauty of today's demonstration is that everyone will believe it was a foreign attack. Iran gets blamed, Congress authorizes increased defense spending, and my private contractors receive billion-dollar contracts to develop countermeasures. Everyone wins. "Except the 300 people who die," Hayes shrugged. "The neural effects are temporary for most subjects. We'll have 20% permanent casualties, 40% with lasting cognitive impairment, and 40% who recover completely. Acceptable losses for the advancement of science." "You're talking about American citizens, researchers, security guards, maintenance workers. Expendable assets in a larger operation." Hayes gestured to one of the operatives. "The dispersal test will proceed as scheduled. Dr. Martinez will assist us in fine-tuning the delivery parameters." The operative stepped forward with zip tie restraints, but Kyla was already moving. She triggered the fire suppression system for the entire floor, filling the corridor with foam and obscuring vision. As alarms blared and emergency sprinklers activated, she rolled through the maintenance access and into the service tunnel. Behind her, she could hear Hayes shouting orders. "Lock down all exits. She doesn't leave this facility alive." But Kyla was already crawling through the narrow tunnel as fast as she could move, following the electrical conduits toward the parking structure. Her phone showed 4:47 a.m. The safety meeting was in 9 hours and 15 minutes.
She emerged through a drainage culvert outside the facility's perimeter fence, soaked from the sprinkler system and covered in concrete dust. The black SUVs were still positioned at the main exits, but they hadn't anticipated her using the storm drainage system. Her phone buzzed with another message from Jay. Extraction point, abandoned gas station, Route 36 eastbound. Look for the blue pickup, bring the drives. Kyla looked back at the Blackstone facility, its emergency lights flashing against the pre-dawn sky. Somewhere inside that building, Hayes was preparing to murder hundreds of innocent people and blame it on a foreign enemy. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Kyla wasn't facing it alone. Someone with significant resources and intelligence capabilities was helping her. The question was whether they could stop Hayes before 2 p.m., or if Kyla would have to go back inside and confront the conspiracy by herself. As she jogged through the industrial district toward the extraction point, one thing was certain. Staff Sergeant Kyla Martinez was back in the fight. The abandoned gas station on Route 36 looked like it had been closed for years. Broken windows, weeds growing through cracked asphalt, and a faded sign that barely read Peterson's Fuel. But parked behind the building was a pristine blue pickup truck with government plates. Kyla approached cautiously, her hand near the tactical knife she'd retrieved from her old kit. The driver's door opened and a woman stepped out, tall, athletic, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. She wore civilian clothes, but everything about her screamed military intelligence. "Staff Sergeant Martinez," the woman said, extending her hand. "Major Jennifer Walsh, Defense Intelligence Agency. I've been tracking this operation for 8 months." So Jay was Major Walsh. That explained the real-time intelligence and access to classified communications. DIA, then you know about Hayes and Neuralstorm. Walsh nodded grimly. "Get in. We have a lot to discuss and not much time." As they drove away from the gas station, Walsh outlined what the Defense Intelligence Agency had discovered. Hayes wasn't just selling bioweapons research. She was the cornerstone of an international arms trafficking network that included rogue elements from Russian intelligence, Chinese military contractors, and several private defense corporations. Neuralstorm is the proof of concept for a new class of cognitive warfare, Walsh explained. Instead of killing enemy populations, you render them incapable of organized resistance, perfect for occupation scenarios. But why test it on American citizens? Because Hayes needs to demonstrate effectiveness to her buyers, and she needs a plausible cover story. Today's attack will be blamed on Iranian agents using stolen Russian biotechnology. 3 different governments get blamed, defense spending skyrockets, and Hayes's private consortium positions itself as the solution provider. Walsh pulled into a warehouse district similar to where Kyla had surveilled the night before. But this facility was clearly a government operation. Satellite dishes, reinforced security, and the kind of electronic countermeasures that suggested serious intelligence work. Inside, Kyla found herself in a sophisticated command center. Multiple screens displayed surveillance footage from Blackstone, intercepts of Russian communications, and real-time tracking of Hayes's financial networks. At least a dozen analysts worked at computer terminals, coordinating what appeared to be a major counterintelligence operation. "We've been building this case for months," Walsh said, leading Kyla to a briefing table covered with photographs and documents. "But we needed someone with inside access to gather physical evidence. When Thompson was killed, we thought the operation was blown." "You knew Thompson was undercover?" "He was our asset. Brilliant officer, but he got too close to the truth too quickly. Hayes had him eliminated before he could extract the evidence we needed." Walsh spread out architectural drawings of the Blackstone facility, marked with red annotations showing the locations of Hayes's modifications. The scope was staggering. Not just the atmospheric processing system, but hidden cameras, communication intercepts, and what appeared to be a secondary laboratory hidden in the facility's basement levels. Hayes has been using Blackstone as a testing ground for neural warfare techniques for over 2 years. Small-scale experiments on volunteers who thought they were participating in cognitive enhancement research.
The safety meeting is just the first large-scale field test. One of the analysts approached with a tablet. Major, we're intercepting increased chatter from the Russian operatives. They're accelerating the timeline. The dispersal system will be activated at 1300 hours, not 1400. Kyla felt her blood chill. That's 1 hour before the safety meeting. They're not targeting the meeting, they're targeting the entire day shift. Walsh cursed under her breath. 2,000 people instead of 300. The casualties will be catastrophic. We have to evacuate the facility, Kyla said. Can't. Hayes has connections throughout Homeland Security and local law enforcement. Any official evacuation order will be countermanded or delayed until it's too late. We need to stop the attack at the source. Walsh turned to the tactical display showing the facility's current status. Hayes had restored partial functionality to the atmospheric processing system, but the main dispersal mechanism was still offline pending final calibration. The good news is that your emergency shutdown damaged more than they initially realized, Walsh said. They'll need at least 3 hours to fully restore the system. The bad news is that it gives them just enough time to deploy before the day shift arrives. What about the evidence I collected? The surveillance footage, the employee records? Crucial for prosecution, but it won't stop today's attack. For that, we need to physically destroy the dispersal system and secure the bioweapon samples. Walsh pulled up a detailed infiltration plan on the main screen. We have a team of 8 operators standing by, but Hayes' security has been reinforced with at least 20 private contractors. A direct assault would result in a firefight that could trigger the release accidentally. But a single person with inside knowledge could disable the system without raising alarms, Kyla said, understanding where this was heading. Exactly. You know the facility layout, the security protocols, and you have the technical expertise to neutralize the bioweapon safely. But I won't lie to you, this is essentially a suicide mission. Hayes will have kill orders out on you, and her people are professionals. Kyla studied the infiltration plan. It was ambitious, but technically feasible. Use the service tunnels to reach the basement laboratory, neutralize the bioweapon samples with the appropriate chemical agents, then ascend to the 5th floor to destroy the dispersal system. What about backup, if something goes wrong? My team will create diversions at the perimeter to draw off some of Hayes' security, but we can't risk a direct intervention. If this operation becomes public before we can present evidence to Congress, Hayes' political connections will bury everything. One of the analysts interrupted again. Major, we're getting reports that Hayes is bringing in additional personnel. Looks like a full tactical team from Meridian Solutions. Walsh checked her watch. That's Hayes' private military contractor. 20 more operators with combat experience. Kyla, if you're going to do this, it has to be now. Kyla looked around the command center at the faces of the DIA personnel. These were career intelligence officers risking their careers to stop a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government and defense contracting. Thompson had died trying to expose this network. How many more would die if she refused? I'll need specialized equipment, she said. Chemical neutralization agents, bypass tools for the newer security systems, and something to destroy the dispersal mechanism without triggering an explosive release. Walsh smiled for the first time since they'd met. Already prepared. We've been planning this infiltration for weeks, just waiting for the right person to execute it. She led Kyla to an equipment room filled with military-grade gear. Chemical suits, neutralization compounds, plastic explosives with precision timers, and electronic warfare tools that could disable security systems without triggering alarms. The basement laboratory is here, Walsh said, pointing to the facility schematic. Intelligence indicates Hayes is storing approximately 50 liters of weaponized neuroagent, enough to affect half of Denver if it gets into the water supply. You'll need to neutralize it completely. And the dispersal system? 5th floor, atmospheric processing control room. But it's not just the equipment you'll need to destroy. Hayes has uploaded the deployment protocols to multiple backup servers. You'll need to physically destroy the primary server array to prevent remote activation. As Kyla suited up in the tactical gear, Walsh handed her a secure communication device. Encrypted channel, direct line to this command center. We'll provide real-time intelligence and early warning if Hayes' security patterns change. Major, Kyla said as she prepared to leave. What happens after this? Even if we stop the attack, Hayes still has political protection. The evidence you collected, combined with what we gathered today, will be presented to a closed congressional hearing tomorrow morning. Hayes' political allies won't be able to protect her once the full scope of the conspiracy is revealed. But that only happens if we prevent today's attack. Kyla nodded and headed for the exit. As she reached the door, Walsh called out one final instruction. Sergeant Martinez, bring Thompson's killers to justice. The drive back to Blackstone took 20 minutes through Denver's early morning traffic. As the facility came into view, Kyla could see that Hayes had indeed reinforced security. Additional vehicles in the parking lot, rooftop sentries, and what appeared to be electronic countermeasures to prevent outside surveillance. But they hadn't anticipated someone who'd been cleaning their floors for 8 months, someone who knew every service tunnel, every maintenance access, and every blind spot in their security coverage. Kyla parked 3 blocks away and began her approach on foot, carrying her equipment in a maintenance bag that would blend in with her normal work supplies. In 6 hours, Hayes would attempt to murder thousands of innocent people to advance her international arms trafficking operation. Staff Sergeant Kyla Martinez was going to make sure that never happened. At 7:15, Kyla descended into the storm drainage system 3 blocks from Blackstone. The tunnel network was more extensive than she'd realized during her first escape. A maze of concrete passages that connected to the facility's foundation drainage. Her tactical headlamp cut through the darkness as she followed the main conduit toward the target building. The secure communicator crackled with Walsh's voice. Perimeter surveillance shows 18 hostiles positioned around the facility. Hayes has installed motion sensors at all ground-level access points, but the basement entries remain clear. Copy that. Beginning basement approach. The drainage tunnel terminated at a filtration chamber beneath Building 7. Above her, Kyla could hear the hum of machinery and occasional footsteps. According to the architectural plans Walsh had provided, the hidden laboratory was directly overhead, accessible through a maintenance shaft that connected to the building's original foundation. She found the access point behind a false wall panel, a remnant from the facility's construction that Hayes had repurposed for her clandestine operations. The shaft was barely wide enough for one person, climbing 20 feet through darkness before opening into what appeared to be a storage room filled with chemical containers. But these weren't standard research supplies. The labels were in multiple languages: Russian, Chinese, and what appeared to be Arabic. Some bore the distinctive markings of military-grade chemical weapons, others showed biohazard symbols she recognized from her army training. Walsh, I'm in the basement facility. This is bigger than we thought. Hayes isn't just developing neural weapons, she's running a complete international arms depot. Document everything you can, but stay focused on the primary mission. We're tracking increased activity on the upper floors. Kyla used her phone to photograph the chemical containers while moving deeper into the laboratory. The space was much larger than indicated on any official building plans. Hayes had excavated beneath the facility's foundation, creating a hidden complex that probably extended under multiple buildings. She found the neural agent storage in a climate-controlled chamber protected by electronic locks that would have challenged most infiltrators. But Kyla's electronic warfare tools, designed by DIA technicians specifically for this mission, bypassed the security in under 3 minutes. Inside the storage chamber, her blood ran cold. 50 liters had been Walsh's estimate, but there were at least 200 liters of the amber-colored neural agent stored in pressurized containers. Each container was labeled with deployment specifications, aerosol dispersal rates, environmental persistence, and projected casualty figures. One label made her stomach turn. Denver Municipal Water Supply, estimated affected population 2.7 million. Hayes wasn't planning to test the weapon on a few thousand people. She was preparing to contaminate the entire metropolitan area. Walsh, we have a problem. The target isn't just the facility. Hayes has enough agents to poison Denver's water supply. I'm seeing deployment plans for municipal infrastructure. Jesus Christ! Kyla, you need to neutralize everything in that chamber. Use the thermite charges. Complete destruction is the only option. Kyla began placing the specialized incendiary devices around the storage containers. The thermite would burn hot enough to break down the neural agent at the molecular level, rendering it completely harmless. But the process would also generate significant heat and smoke. Hayes's security would detect the destruction within minutes. As she armed the final charge, she heard voices echoing from somewhere above. Two men speaking in English with Russian accents, discussing delivery schedules and payment transfers. They were moving closer to the basement access. She activated the timer, 5 minutes until detonation, and began moving toward the exit. But as she reached the storage room, the voices were now directly overhead. Someone was entering the basement laboratory. Kyla pressed herself against the wall as footsteps descended into the hidden complex. Through a gap in the doorway, she could see two operatives she recognized from the previous night, the men who'd been installing the dispersal system. They were carrying additional equipment and what appeared to be deployment schedules. "Moscow confirms timeline acceleration," one said in accented English. "Full release at 1200 hours, during shift change, maximum casualty potential." Noon. Hayes had moved the timeline up another hour. What about the cleaning woman? Hayes wants confirmation of elimination. She's trapped in the building. Rooftop surveillance detected her entry, but thermal imaging lost her signal in the basement levels, probably hiding in the drainage system. They were tracking her with thermal imaging. That meant they knew approximately where she was, even if they couldn't pinpoint her exact location. The thermite charges would detonate in 3 minutes. Kyla needed to reach the upper floors and destroy the dispersal system before Hayes activated the backup plan. But first, she had to get past two armed operatives who were now searching the basement for her. She activated her secure communicator on silent mode and sent a text message to Walsh. "Basement neutralization in 3 minutes, moving to target 2. Timeline accelerated to 1200. The response came immediately. "Understood. Perimeter diversion in 2 minutes. Use the chaos." Kyla checked her equipment, chemical neutralization compounds, plastic explosives, and the electronic warfare tools needed to destroy the atmospheric processing servers. Everything was ready except for one problem. The basement laboratory had only one exit, and 2 Russian operatives were standing between her and the access shaft. She made a decision that would have horrified her commanding officers in Afghanistan, but was perfectly suited to her current situation. Instead of avoiding the operatives, she would eliminate them. The tactical knife was a military issue, designed for silent neutralization. Kyla had hoped never to use it again, but Hayes's conspiracy had forced her back into a war she thought she'd left behind. The first operative was examining the chemical storage when Kyla struck. The blade found the gap between his vest and helmet, and he dropped without a sound. His partner turned at the noise, reaching for his sidearm, but Kyla was already moving. Her army training took over completely. Assess, close, neutralize. Both operatives were down in under 15 seconds. She retrieved their weapons and communication devices, then began her ascent to the main facility. Behind her, the thermite charges had 1 minute remaining before they would destroy Hayes's entire chemical weapons stockpile. The service elevator to the 5th floor was risky, but the stairwells would be monitored. Kyla used the dead operative's access cards to reach the atmospheric processing control room, where she could hear machinery running at full capacity. Hayes had restored the dispersal system. Through the control room's reinforced window, she could see the same equipment the operatives had been installing the night before, but now fully operational. Computer screens showed pressure readings, deployment calculations, and a countdown timer, 47 minutes until release. But the room wasn't empty. Dr. Hayes herself stood at the main control panel, flanked by 4 security contractors. She was speaking into a satellite phone, coordinating what sounded like similar operations in other cities. Seattle team confirms readiness. Los Angeles deployment was delayed until 1500 hours due to wind patterns. The Phoenix operation proceeds as scheduled. other cities. Hayes wasn't just attacking Denver. This was a coordinated assault on multiple metropolitan areas. Kyla's secure communicator vibrated with an urgent message from Walsh. Massive explosion detected in basement level. Well done. Perimeter diversion commencing now. Through the facility's windows, Kyla could see Walsh's promised diversion, what appeared to be a coordinated assault on the facility's main entrance. Vehicles, tactical teams, and enough firepower to convince Hayes' security that they were under attack from outside forces. Most of Hayes' contractors rushed toward the main entrance, leaving only 2 guards with Hayes in the control room. But the room's security was designed to prevent unauthorized access, not to trap people inside. Kyla had one advantage. She knew how to shut down the entire atmospheric processing system from the maintenance controls outside the secured area. The backup neutralization plan was simple but dangerous. Flood the control room with fire suppression foam, destroy the control computers with explosives, and eliminate Hayes and her remaining operatives before they could activate manual backup systems. As the facility's alarms began blaring from Walsh's diversionary assault, Kyla armed her final explosive charges and prepared to end Dr. Rebecca Hayes' conspiracy once and for all. The countdown timer showed 43 minutes until mass murder. Staff Sergeant Kyla Martinez was about to make sure it never reached 0. Kyla positioned herself above the atmospheric processing control room, accessing the maintenance crawl space that ran along the ceiling. Through the ventilation grates, she could see Hayes coordinating the multi-city attack while her 2 remaining guards monitored the facility's security feeds. Denver deployment in 40 minutes, Hayes spoke into her satellite phone. Phoenix and Seattle teams maintain the original schedule. Los Angeles will compensate for any delays with increased concentration. The scope was staggering. Hayes had orchestrated simultaneous bioweapon attacks on 4 major American cities, using the chaos and casualties to justify massive defense spending increases that would benefit her private military consortium. Kyla's explosive charges were armed and ready, but she needed to time the assault perfectly. The fire suppression system would incapacitate Hayes' guards, but wouldn't stop Hayes herself from activating manual backup controls that could trigger immediate release. Her secure communicator vibrated with a message from Walsh. Perimeter assault successful. Drew off 15 hostiles. Building sealed. You have 10 minutes before they realize it's a diversion. 10 minutes to stop a conspiracy that reached international intelligence services and threatened millions of American lives. Kyla activated the building's fire suppression system for the 5th floor, then dropped through the ceiling grate as thick foam began flooding the control room. The 2 guards were immediately disoriented, stumbling blindly through the chemical fog, but Hayes lunged for the manual release console. Not happening, Kyla said, tackling Hayes before she could reach the consoles. Hayes was stronger than expected, trained in close-quarters combat. They crashed into the control panel, alarms blaring as systems went offline. Hayes broke free and drew a ceramic knife that had passed through the facility's metal detectors. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," Hayes snarled, slashing at Kyla's midsection. Kyla dodged the blade and countered with her own tactical knife. Approved by who? Which officials signed off on murdering American civilians? Officials who understand that sometimes democracy needs guidance, Hayes replied, pressing her attack. The public can't be trusted to make the right decisions about national security. They need to be shown the consequences of weakness. Their fight moved around the equipment-filled control room, each trying to gain advantage while avoiding the dispersal machinery. One wrong move could trigger an accidental release that would kill everyone in the building. "You're talking about treason," Kyla said, parrying another thrust. Hayes laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Treason? I'm preventing World War III. Do you think China and Russia will hesitate to use these weapons once they perfect them? Better to demonstrate American resolve now, under controlled conditions, than to face uncontrolled deployment later." Controlled conditions? You're planning to kill millions of people. "To save tens of millions," Hayes countered. The neural agent causes temporary cognitive impairment in most subjects, acceptable losses for strategic advantage. But Kyla had read the real casualty projections in the basement laboratory. Hayes was lying about the weapon's effects. The neural agent caused permanent brain damage in over 60% of victims, with a 20% fatality rate from respiratory failure. The fight intensified as both women recognized that only one would walk away. Hayes had military training, but Kyla had combat experience and the desperation of someone fighting for innocent lives. Kyla finally gained the advantage when Hayes stumbled over a fallen chair. The tactical knife found its mark, and Hayes collapsed against the main control console. The backup systems, Hayes gasped, blood spreading across her shirt. Remote activation. The Phoenix team has override codes.
Kyla grabbed Hayes' satellite phone and began scrolling through the contacts. Phoenix, Seattle, Los Angeles. Each team was operating independently with their own deployment schedules. "How do I stop them?" Kyla demanded. Hayes smiled weakly. "You can't. The other operations are already in motion. Denver was just the proof of concept." But Kyla was already texting Walsh. "Hayes neutralized. Primary threat eliminated. Secondary operations in Phoenix, Seattle, LA are still active. Need immediate federal intervention." The response came within seconds. "FBI teams mobilizing all 3 cities. Evidence you collected provides legal authority for immediate arrests. Outstanding work, Sergeant." Kyla turned back to the dispersal controls. The countdown timer showed 18 minutes until release, but Hayes had been right about one thing. Backup systems were automatically engaging. The neural agent would be deployed unless she could destroy the entire control mechanism. She placed her remaining plastic explosives around the server array and dispersal equipment. The charges would completely destroy the facility's ability to deploy bioweapons, but the explosion might also trigger emergency protocols that could spread contamination through the building's regular ventilation system. Her phone buzzed with an evacuation alert. "All personnel report to designated assembly areas immediately. This is not a drill." Walsh's team was evacuating the building under the cover of a chemical leak emergency. In 15 minutes, everyone except Hayes' remaining operatives would be safely outside the potential contamination zone. Kyla set the timer for 12 minutes and began her own evacuation. But as she reached the stairwell, she encountered the 2 security contractors who'd been guarding Hayes. They'd recovered from the fire suppression attack and were now blocking her escape route. "Dr. Hayes is dead," one of them said in heavily accented English. "Contract requires elimination of all witnesses." "The building's about to explode," Kyla replied. "You can either let me pass or we all die together." "Acceptable outcome," the second contractor said, raising his weapon. Kyla was out of options and nearly out of time. The explosive charges would detonate in 10 minutes, and she was still 5 floors from the exit. But she still had one advantage: her intimate knowledge of the building's layout. Instead of fighting through the guards, she activated the facility's emergency lockdown procedures. Blast doors began sealing throughout the building as the automated system responded to her administrative override. The contractors found themselves trapped in the stairwell, while Kyla escaped through a maintenance shaft that led directly to the parking garage. She emerged from the building as Walsh's evacuation teams were completing their withdrawal. Federal agents were already arresting Hayes' remaining operatives, while hazmat teams prepared to secure the facility once the explosives detonated. 8 minutes, Walsh said, handing Kyla a protective respirator. "Will the charges completely destroy the dispersal system?" "Everything," Kyla confirmed. "The neural agent, the delivery equipment, and all the research data Hayes was selling to foreign governments." At exactly 12:03 p.m., the explosions lit up the 5th floor of Building 7. The atmospheric processing control room was completely destroyed, along with any possibility of deploying the neural weapon. Kyla's phone buzzed with updates from Walsh's command center. "Phoenix team arrested during facility approach. Seattle operation intercepted. The Los Angeles team eliminated resisting arrest. Operation Neural Storm was over." 6 months later, Kyla Martinez stood before a closed congressional hearing,
presenting evidence that led to the exposure of an international conspiracy involving defense contractors, foreign intelligence services, and corrupt government officials. Hayes's network was dismantled, and new oversight protocols were established for biodefense research. The cleaning lady who'd stumbled onto a bioweapons conspiracy had become the primary witness in one of the largest national security cases in American history. But more importantly, 2.7 million people in Denver went to sleep that night without knowing how close they'd come to a catastrophe that would have changed their lives forever. Staff Sergeant Kyla Martinez had kept her oath to protect American citizens, even when that meant fighting enemies within her own government. The conspiracy was broken, the weapons were destroyed, and democracy had survived another test of its resilience against those who would sacrifice freedom for power. Justice, it turned out, sometimes wore a blue uniform and carried a mop. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.